Okay po, live na po tayo. I'll just do the AD.
Throughout UPLB's more than 100 years of existence, it has worked in partnership with local and international organizations and institutions in the pursuit of excellence in instruction, research, and public service. Strong partnerships began when the then UP College of Agriculture and the College of Forestry, the first two colleges, established a food security program and became the home of the International Rice Research Institute. It was a partnership with Cornell University in the United States that made an indelible mark in the two colleges' development and history.
The UPCA Cornell contract and the UP Cornell Graduate Education Program strengthened the critical mass of professional staff in UPLB. This graduate program was responsible for producing about 56 PhDs. UP became famous in Southeast Asia, and staff development was so strong until we became UPLB, with many colleges that started as huge departments of the College of Agriculture.
As UPLB nurtured its traditional areas of strength, it unleashed its potentials in allied areas, growth points, and emerging fields, giving way to more partnerships and collaborations.
UPLB envisions itself to be a globally competitive graduate and research university contributing to national development. As a national university whose niche programs are agriculture, forestry, environmental science, and veterinary medicine, UPLB is tasked to capacitate state universities and colleges.
With integration becoming an urgent concern in the higher education arena, UPLB further intensified partnership building to enable it to collaborate in research and instruction, exchange materials, and enhance the mobility of faculty members and students. It now maintains partnerships with a significant number of regional and international educational institutions.
UPLB can provide international linkages through its partners, through collaborations in research and academic programs, through student exchange programs, as well as complementation of its resources, including physical and human resources. We welcome partnerships in our niche programs from universities and institutions in the ASEAN region, as well as other countries around the world.
As the higher education landscape shifts with time, UPLB will keep up by continually developing human resources, revitalizing programs for relevance, and promoting internationalization. In this highly globalized higher education arena, forming and nurturing partnerships for institutional dynamism and development is the way forward. Throughout UPLB's more than 100 years of existence, it has worked in partnership with local and international organizations and institutions in the pursuit of excellence in instruction, research, and public service. Strong partnerships began when the then UP College of Agriculture and the College of Forestry, the first two colleges, established a food security program and became the home of the International Rice Research Institute. It was a partnership with Cornell University in the United States that made an indelible mark in the two colleges' development and history.
The UPCA Cornell contract and the UP Cornell Graduate Education Program strengthened the critical mass of professional staff in UPLB. This graduate program was responsible for producing about 56 PhDs. UP became famous in Southeast Asia, and staff development was so strong until we became UPLB, with many colleges that started as huge departments of the College of Agriculture.
As UPLB nurtured its traditional areas of strength, it unleashed its potentials in allied areas, growth points, and emerging fields, giving way to more partnerships and collaborations.
UPLB envisions itself to be a globally competitive graduate and research university contributing to national development. As a national university whose niche programs are agriculture, forestry, environmental science, and veterinary medicine, UPLB is tasked to capacitate state universities and colleges.
With integration becoming an urgent concern in the higher education arena, UPLB further intensified partnership building to enable it to collaborate in research and instruction, exchange materials, and enhance the mobility of faculty members and students. It now maintains partnerships with a significant number of regional and international educational institutions.
UPLB can provide international linkages through its partners, through collaborations in research and academic programs, through student exchange programs, as well as complementation of its resources, including physical and human resources. We welcome partnerships in our niche programs from universities and institutions in the ASEAN region, as well as other countries around the world.
As the higher education landscape shifts with time, UPLB will keep up by continually developing human resources, revitalizing programs for relevance, and promoting internationalization. In this highly globalized higher education arena, forming and nurturing partnerships for institutional dynamism and development is the way forward. Throughout UPLB's more than 100 years of existence, it has worked in partnership with local and international organizations and institutions in the pursuit of excellence in instruction, research, and public service. Strong partnerships began when the then UP College of Agriculture and the College of Forestry, the first two colleges, established a food security program and became the home of the International Rice Research Institute. It was a partnership with Cornell University in the United States that made an indelible mark in the two colleges' development and history.
The UPCA Cornell contract and the UP Cornell Graduate Education Program strengthened the critical mass of professional staff in UPLB. This graduate program was responsible for producing about 56 PhDs. UP became famous in Southeast Asia, and staff development was so strong until we became UPLB, with many colleges that started as huge departments of the College of Agriculture.
As UPLB nurtured its traditional areas of strength, it unleashed its potentials in allied areas, growth points, and emerging fields, giving way to more partnerships and collaborations.
UPLB envisions itself to be a globally competitive graduate and research university contributing to national development. As a national university whose niche programs are agriculture, forestry, environmental science, and veterinary medicine, UPLB is tasked to capacitate state universities and colleges.
With integration becoming an urgent concern in the higher education arena, UPLB further intensified partnership building to enable it to collaborate in research and instruction, exchange materials, and enhance the mobility of faculty members and students. It now maintains partnerships with a significant number of regional and international educational institutions.
UPLB can provide international linkages through its partners, through collaborations in research and academic programs, through student exchange programs, as well as complementation of its resources, including physical and human resources. We welcome partnerships in our niche programs from universities and institutions in the ASEAN region, as well as other countries around the world.
As the higher education landscape shifts with time, UPLB will keep up by continually developing human resources, revitalizing programs for relevance, and promoting internationalization. In this highly globalized higher education arena, forming and nurturing partnerships for institutional dynamism and development is the way forward.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the HUME 123 webinar entitled Unpacking the Value of Transdisciplinary Approach in Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction. I will start by introducing myself. Most of you would know me as Ma'am Patch. I am Christina Cordero Bailey from the Department of Community and Environmental Resource Planning and one of the faculty in charge of section W, if I remember correctly, on the course Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction in Human Ecologies. Human ecosystems, I'm sorry. I hope that everyone was able to have a good lunch, and that we all have at least a satisfied tummy. And so right now, for the next 2 hours, we are here to fill our minds naman with a series of interesting talks that will show the transdisciplinary nature of the College of Human Ecology and exactly how each of our different specialties in our college actually work together to address the very important issue of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So let us now kick off this webinar with some welcoming remarks from our Associate Dean, Dr. Maria Teresa Talavera. Ma'am Tet?
Hello.
Hi. Okay,
Afternoon po. Okay, so wait lang. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of our Dean, Dr. Ricardo Sandalo, let me welcome you to this webinar. Okay, actually yung course na HUME 123. So we are glad to have you with us and thank you for attending this activity. So as you can see, the title of the webinar contains big words. Actually, kahit ako, even myself, sabi ko, oh, nung nabasa ko to, really big words. Okay, transdisciplinary, climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction. So for me, these are big words actually. On its own, these concepts are quite big, okay? But we are in this webinar trying to unpack or understand these concepts together. So it's really good to have this course in the Human Ecology curricular program to facilitate our understanding about these concepts. As we are experiencing the effects of climate change, we do need to understand climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, transdisciplinary approach, but more importantly, we also need to act, diba? So we want to adapt to a life or to life in a changing climate. We want to reduce our vulnerability to the harmful effects of climate change. And then we also want to protect the lives and livelihoods of families and communities, especially those who are most vulnerable to disasters or emergencies. From my understanding, we need to have a transdisciplinary approach wherein various stakeholders in various disciplines and sectors work together beyond our disciplinal, okay, beyond our discipline, and implement new knowledge to achieve a common goal. So, indeed, there is no denying we are in the midst of climate change. Even the COVID-19 pandemic has been linked with the climate change. While there is no direct evidence so far, we do know that climate change alters how we relate to other species, and that matters to our health and our risk for infections. So there's also coming from nutrition discipline, there is also a nutrition and infection cycle which is applied now in understanding COVID-19. So with that, let me end here, and I hope we will have all a fruitful and informative Saturday afternoon. So again, thank you for attending this webinar, and thank you to the organizers as well. So back to you po.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Ted, for opening our webinar and setting the scene for the entire afternoon and what we will be tackling today with our students, and showing them how we actually work together po, and to make sure that we can actually uplift and improve all of our adaptation measures and reduce the disasters that hopefully will not be too harsh in with us. Okay, I will continue my. So in the next point, we are now to give us an overview of the program and to actually also give the first talk for today. Is none other than our Professor Ron J. P. Dangkalan from the Department of Social Development Services. Professor Ron is a political economist and a human ecologist. He is an assistant professor at the DSDS, College of Human Ecology in UP Los Baños. He's a founding member of the Interdisciplinary Studies for Water based at the UPLB School of Environmental Science and Management, and a co-investigator of an EGAP-funded COVID research on health policy compliance at the UP Resilience Institute. Since August of 2020 to the present, he is a foreign researcher under Dr. Quinn, is that correct? Quinn Lee's laboratory at the Institute of Economic Research in the Seoul National University. So this afternoon, Sir Ron will be, besides talking about giving us an overview, he will also talk about applying the transdisciplinary and systems approach in CAA and DRR. Sir Ron, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Patch. No? And I think Asok Dintet already explained what is a transdisciplinary approach. Thank you, Ma'am Tet. No? Ma'am Tet really had a very beautiful definition already, and I think she got it right already. Now, so I'll just give an overview of our presentations for this afternoon. So I'll set the tone on why are we coming here together. There's Nutri, there's community and environmental resource planning. There's also social technology, and of course the family and human development. Why are they all here when we try to look into climate change adaptations and DRR? And of course, we will have human nutrition in CCA-DRR, very relevant topic. I know a lot of practitioners are really wanting to see it, and I saw some practitioners who are also here since this is open to the public, not just our students. Dr. Amy Barrion will talk about it. And of course, death and disasters. What about the social services side of death-related services under the 4 thematic areas of DRM? It will be given by Ma'am Emmy Mendoza. And building back smarter communities post-extreme event, we have Mr. Ben Agihon from the UN Habitat Philippines, and we'll have a reactor all the way, coming from Eastern Samar State University, and also maraming ikakwentong personal also, her own personal experiences of disaster, si Dr. Blesilda Badok. And we'll have an open forum with Prof. Chris Malenab and a closing remark by Prof. Meme de Mesa. Okay, I'll go directly into my presentation. As Ma'am Tet said, no, there's a lot of big concepts that are here, but there are actually something that is very practical, and something that we can understand. And they're not just a matter of semantics, but also I think they are very important in shaping how we frame CCA-DRR, not just in terms of our analysis, but also in terms of practice. There are 3 stories contained in this presentation. One is the human ecology story. And I think it's very important that we try to understand why we are all here together. As I said, I'm setting the tone. The other one is the transdisciplinary and systems approach story. Is this just another semantic? Or when we say transdisciplinary approach, it's at the very core, at the very heart of human ecology. When Ellen Swallow Richards envisioned it in the Lake Placid conferences during the turn of the century. Then I learned this from Dr. Michael Pido. I think Prof. Eva from Palawan State is here right now in the audience. Something new that I learned, super wicked problems. Now, we learned about wicked problems, but now Dr. Michael Pido was saying super wicked problems. No? And I think this is all relevant on how we apply human eco in the transdisciplinary and systems approach to address these super wicked problems, not just in the academe, but also in practice. Looking back at the history of human ecology, of course, this was inspired by the talk of Dr. Sherry Ann Chapman at the University of Alberta to celebrate the 100 years of home economics and human ecology in Alberta in honor of Dr. Elizabeth MP, who was a nutritionist, by the way, and Professor Emerita of Home Economics at Alberta. She said that the knowledge of our history in human ecology and home economics is not a luxury, because it's very important in preserving and interpreting that history for our profession to survive. And I don't think it's just about survival, but we also affirm the strength of human ecology and its relevance today in the 21st century, given these super wicked problems and why human ecology matters. There are 4 major references that I use, and I invite you to read if you want to understand why human ecology is important and relevant, and why human ecology is transdisciplinary in nature, and why all of us, no? HFDS, IHNF, DSDS, and DSERP are all part of one family. And these are some of the major references that I showed. No? There are many interpretations also of what human ecology is, and the human ecology story, and the CCA-DRR story. And I offer one of this interpretation coming from my own standpoints, from a human ecology worldview, from a philosophy and humanities worldview that asks the why, the nature of knowledge and inquiry and truth, and the political economy worldview to also understand when human ecology was developing and CCA-DRR, what are the development and political milieu that actually shape social and disciplinary changes. Human ecology story. From the very beginning, human ecology was a call to action. No? Ellen Swallow Richards, the mother of human ecology, was the first graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and she was a chemist. She used the word ecology for her new field. And when she used her new field, she was born in a world where there's industrialization, there's a lot of people moving from rural to urban areas. People's lives are basically changing, because remember, this was 1900s America, when a lot of industrialization was happening and people were changing. Now people's lives are changing. And one of the major concerns was food. That is why we are saying that nutritionists are human ecologists, because from the very beginning, when human ecology was conceived, there was question a lot about food with this industrialization. There's no ways of consuming food. The control of food preparation shifted from private domain in the household now to industries. At the time, with manufacturing, they are producing canned foods, right? And there was concern of whether these food are nutritious enough. And of course, with the emergence of these new lifestyles, it also created new problems, including new illnesses. The founders of human ecology were concerned about these changes. And ang concern ng mga founders ng human ecology, paano magbe-benefit ang mga individuals and their families, and not just the industries that were profiting from these new modes of consumption. Human ecology is beyond the productionist paradigm of produce, 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 produce. It's always concerned about human welfare and social justice. Human ecology is concerned about the near home. What is happening within the home? That's why there's nutrition in us. That's why there's social technology in us. There's family and human development in us, and how we integrate with the bigger system. That's why we have community and environmental planning with us. But unlike other fields that is mostly concerned with the science, we're also concerned about ethics and social justice. Because when human ecology was formed, again, what Ellen Swallow Richards was thinking, in this new life world that is happening with the industrial age in North America, how can it be just and how can it benefit people ultimately? The Lake Placid conferences was very instrumental in shaping what would be human ecology. When Ellen launched it, he proposed many terms, as Dr. Sue McGregor actually noted in her paper. Now, I read a lot of paper by Dr. Sue McGregor, and it was very enlightening of what is really human ecology. Ellen Swallow Richard proposed the term ecology, but dahil babae siya, and it was already used in the British Medical Journal, it was doomed to fail, and the ecology word will not prosper. She also used human ecology, home ecology, and many other concepts and many other terms that would mean the interface of systems of the environment and human beings in the home. No? So instead, Ellen Swallow Richards came into domestic science because that was the only place at that time that was available for women. And in the Lake Placid conferences, they established what would be home economics, and that includes nutrition. No? And that's why when home economics was born in 1908, it was actually not just homemaking, but it's also about the interfaces of human life at home with the systems and their physical environment. And it would take another half a century before that ecology angle that Ellen originally envisioned would actually happen. Home ecology, it would happen in the 1970s when home economics faculties would actually change their name deliberately to human ecology. So it took us a little bit of delay before we can actually accept the idea of Ellen Swallow Richards. I go now to the transdisciplinary story, to the story of transdisciplinary systems and approaches. Okay. When we say transdisciplinary, what do we mean? Is it just a shift in it's just another semantic, or it is different in its own right? When you say transdisciplinary, I like this demonstration by Heinzmann, and I think Dr. Tet brilliantly explained this already. When you say transdisciplinary does not just combine discipline, as in multidisciplinary research. It does not just combine separate perspectives to form one perspective. Transdisciplinary perspective goes beyond discipline in co-producing new knowledge. I like the definition most by Dr. Sue McGregor. Dr. Sue McGregor said that transdisciplinary means knowledge is produced between, across, beyond, and even outside academic disciplines. So knowledge co-production exists even outside universities. I'm looking at Dr. Dybel and Carson's article in 2017, and they were saying that in the 1970s, that's the only time when transdisciplinary knowledge actually, or the transdisciplinary term came out. But Ellen Swallow Richards, when you look at her writing, she was inviting civil engineers, people from the community, non-academics, to actually participate in her new discipline, which she called human ecology, home ecology, but hindi nga pinayagan, kaya naging home economics. So in essence, human ecology from the very, very beginning was transdisciplinary, even before the transdisciplinary concept was developed, according to Dr. Dybel and Carson. Very interesting article that I can share to everyone later on. For better visualization, before I apply it to climate change, how does an interdisciplinary and a transdisciplinary approach makes a most difference? I'm interested in healthcare research, and that is why I'd like to show some healthcare example. In an interdisciplinary setting, a patient was just a source of data. It's all the doctors from different disciplines that are talking and ikaw, kuhaan ka lang ng data. And when the gastroenterologist, anesthesiologist, the colorectal surgeon, and the clinical nutritionist talks, the treatment plan will be given to patient. This is an interdisciplinary form. In very, very practical terms, is actually happening. In a transdisciplinary approach, it is very different. From the very beginning, the patient is not seen as a source of data, but a co-producer of knowledge that has the ability to make co-decisions. And when you say co-decisions, the patients are allowed siguro to read journals. Patients are actually allowed to see, are allowed to question, allowed to make inquiry on very medical issues, and the treatment plan is actually shared with the patient. A transdisciplinary, when Ma'am Emmy and I were talking sometime, sabi ko sa kanya, there's no field that is where transdisciplinary approach is so practical than medicine, because many studies are already pointing out. I'm showing here a very small sample study by Venick that in the case of quality improvements in hospitals, for example, using a transdisciplinary approach, make hospitals aware of the urgency of the need to improve healthcare services. A transdisciplinary approach is this practical. It might be a very, very, very big term, but also it is very practical in nature. And human ecology as a transdisciplinary approach that includes nutrition, family and human development studies, community environmental resource planning, and social technology is something that we have to treasure. No, our friends in Diliman and UANP were saying we are going trans. No, from inter we're going trans. In human eco, trans na tayo. No, and this is the very practical application of what we mean by a transdisciplinary approach. This is a paper that will come out that was co-authored by Prof. Emmy and I and Sir Gillian. When we say transdisciplinary, what are then the implications? First, it facilitates genuine co-creation, where communities are not just seen as sources of data, but co-producers of knowledge. It allows for genuine stakeholders engagement, and it also allows planners and communities, particularly in DRR, the ability to see connections in complex and wicked problems. Now, to the super wicked problems such as climate change and disasters. We know that super wicked problems are characterized by ambiguity, by the problems in itself are symptoms of another. And in these very complex problems like climate change, for example, where 35 million people are affected by floods, 821 million people are undernourished. It's not just confined to nutrition, to urban planning, to social services, not just to the family and psychosocial analysis. We need a transdisciplinary approach that is actually co-shared with the community. Now, when we look at disasters as well, it's a super wicked problem because flooding, for example, is a symptom of poor urban planning, of poor management of drainage. Yung sinasabi ko nga kanina kay Ma'am Amy, there's a lot of malnourished people that are being recorded after a disaster, and being malnourished is part of the consequences of disasters, but that's why we need nutrition people to also deal into the questions of disasters. And what human ecology does in trying to deal with this increasing gravity of disasters that are happening now in the world is for us to be able to use full force, all of our different approaches coming together to come up with a holistic intervention that not just all of us, the 4 departments and institute talking, but also the community. And I think this is something that we should appreciate, especially given the increase in disaster incidences that are happening all across the board. They're increasing. The human ecology framework is this. And when we say human ecology framework, I let the other speakers later on discuss the nitty-gritty of it. But the human ecology framework has a reason. Why social services are here? Why nutrition is here? Sabi nga natin, from the very beginning of human ecology, nutrition was a concern. And of course, environmental integrity, pollution, nakita natin, ang daming problem that Ellen Swallow-Richards is talking about, the family, and of course, social technology. When we look at the CHE framework, We believe that a resilient social ecological system has a food security, nutrition, and human health aspect to it. Ma'am Tet already mentioned it, and I think Ma'am Amy will look into it. We need thriving families and we need human development to ensure resilience in our socio-ecological system. We also need to build back smarter communities, and Ma'am Amy later, and which Ben will later on discuss. And we need to have adequate social services and participatory approaches and strong institutions to be able to mainstream these approaches. The human ecology approach is not just semantic, it's not just an idea, but if we really take advantage of it, and if we really use it to really solicit also the perspectives of the community in this co-creative process, it can actually make a lot of difference. And I was reading again into Ellen Swallow Richard's works. Ano ba yung kaibahan natin sa sustainability science, sa environmental science, and the rest? Because human ecology from the very beginning was always concerned with the near, with the intimate, with the personal, and the near home. And mamaya babalikan ko yan yung concept, patapos na ako. No? There are tools in human ecology. Prof. Eva is here. And they demonstrated some of the examples of what we have with systems approach. Sesame with Palawan State University and the University of Queensland. It can help capture those complex interfaces. We are also using the human ecology approach with the causal loop diagramming. This was with the UP Resilience Institute that we are doing on COVID. These are just some of the examples of how human ecology in itself as a field. We have our own tools, we have our own methods, and of course the systems part, the social ecological part, which we borrow, is also very human ecological. Now, before I end this presentation, I'd like to ask why everyday life is more important than ever. Human ecology is a study of human-environment relations, but also human ecology at the same time is concerned with everyday life, with near home. Because galing tayo, di ba, sa home economics. It's concerned with everyday life, and I think it's more important than ever. In an age where there's big data, very impersonal, treating people merely as numbers, we need human ecology na maibaba natin ko yung CCA-DRR, that human beings are not just data, but we are human beings with dignity. Nilagay ko din dito, X-Men Apocalypse, because we're facing a lot of complex and wicked problems. Then human ecology is something that we need. I'll end this presentation, a very short presentation, with these three stories. Again, why are we here as human ecologists? And why should we affirm our story as a field? Why do transdisciplinary and systems approach matter? Are they matter of semantics, or are they at the very core when human ecology as a field was conceived by Ellen Swallow Richards and the brave woman who said human ecology is always a home for women? Because when women were marginalized in traditional sciences, they found their home in human ecology. And it was women who actually championed human ecology. I'll tell you, the University of Alberta, one of the pioneers was a nutritionist of human ecology and home economics there, Dr. Elizabeth MP, for whom the U of A MP lecture was named. And she's a nutritionist, by the way. So how do we collectively deal and thrive amid super wicked problems such as climate change and disasters? Our next speakers will tell that using the human ecological lens. So looking back into our history as human ecology is not a luxury, because we know that there's a lot of debate on, is human ecology still relevant in the 21st century? But I think it's very important that we preserve and interpret our history, not just for human ecology as a discipline, but for a world that is becoming more complex, more connected, and filled with super wicked problems. Maraming salamat po, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Ron, for that very comprehensive lesson on human ecology. And not just a lesson, you showed us exactly how other fields, like in the field of medicine, that we actually, they really should work together on not just as the different specialists, but taking into consideration paano nga kailangan makapag-input rin ang mga pasyente to what their treatment is. So thank you very much for that very nice setting that you have presented to us for this afternoon. And hold on, I'll share my screen again. So now let us move on to a very essential topic for all of us. Hindi tayo mabubuhay kung wala tayong pagkain. So here we will, Dr. Amy Cherie Barrion will share with us about nutrition in emergencies. Dr. Barrion is a professor and one of our new UP scientists here at the Institute of Human Nutrition and Food in our college. She is also the current director of the institute. Dr. Barrion has served as editor-in-chief of the Journal of Human Ecology and the Journal of Nutritionists Dietitians Association of the Philippines. And she has conducted many public service and extension works with various organizations and institutions, both locally and internationally. And so now we are here to see the approach of the human nutrition in CCA-DRR. And Ma'am Amy, the floor is yours na po.
Thank you, Ma'am Bailey. So, good afternoon. First and foremost, I would like to thank HUME 123 for inviting me to be one of your resource speakers. So, ang ganda-ganda nung kanina, nung talk nawala ako, akala ko audience lang ako. Magsasalita na pala ako. Ako na pala next. Ang ganda-gandang I was really listening sa overview ni Sir Ron, and I would like to hear more. Ang ganda nung ending talaga. How can we collectively deal with this super wicked problems? Imagine, hindi lang problems, ang description pa may super na, may wicked pa. Talagang sabihin, it's really something na very big and it's very hard. Siguro as human ecologist and nutritionist, talagang maganda din yung quote niya, yung everyday life is more important than ever. Siguro kung ililink lang natin pareho, siguro one day at a time, one step at a time, because it's really very hard. We live in a very uncertain world, di ba? Lalo na ngayon, VUCA world tayo. So really, it's very hard to plan, very, very hard to look at the future, because what is important is the present at the moment, kasi nga very uncertain. There are so many things happening in our environment. Now, my topic is on nutrition and emergency. Actually, when I was invited, I was asking the faculty members, what do you expect me to deliver in terms of CCA-DRR, sa climate change adaptation. So the first thing I thought is our lecture on nutrition in emergency. What is the function of a nutritionist dietitian and how we go about it, no? So I know many people are asking siguro, paano nga yung delivery ng pagkain during emergencies, ano ang nutritional consideration, things like that. So I will be giving you a very practical side on how we function as nutritionist dietitian during climate change adaptation and during emergencies and disasters, like for example in our Philippines. So I'll just share my screen. So to give an overview, we have what we call nutrition management in emergencies and disaster. And in our field, maybe it's just to give an overview, no. So we remember we talk about emergency and differentiating emergency with disaster. We say emergency when it's really very sudden, no? Sudden, and there's an urgent need to respond. And the community and the society can still actually respond given the resources, as compared sa disaster. Pag disaster na talaga, it's really overwhelming. The impact exceeds the capacity of the community or society to cope, and there is massive loss, no? There's a serious disruption of function in the community. There's widespread losses in terms of human, in terms of economic, in terms of materials, in terms of the environment. So it's really very hard to cope. So it's already termed as disaster. Now, we have different types of disasters. So just to go over as part of the overview, we have of course, the natural one. We know that our country, the Philippines, is very much susceptible to a lot or different sorts of calamities. We experience a lot of typhoons, averaging 20 typhoons per year. So we have man-made. So we also have some issues with regards to our political conflicts, technological disasters. And nutrition is necessary during times of disaster to prevent malnutrition. Kasi remember, di ba, food is one of the basic necessities. So before you can do anything, before you can function, to survive, to live, food is very important. So our primary objective is during disaster and emergency is to prevent death and malnutrition. So kasi pag when you are malnourished or undernourished, you become weak. Your immunity subsides. So bumababa yung immunity mo, mas lalo kang nagiging prone sa mga diseases at saka mga infection. So baka yung katabi mo, mahatsingan ka lang, mamaya, nagfi-fever ka na or something like that. Kasi nga, you are undernourished. Your nutritional status is poor because of poor food intake, maybe because of absence of food, because of what's happening in our environment. So mas lalong nagkakaroon ng casualties. Eh di ba ito nga ang natin, human resource is one of the most important resource we have. So as much as possible during emergencies and disaster, walang mamamatay, no casualties. So it is necessary to prevent the worsening nutritional situation. So paano natin ginagawa yon? So we have this term emergency feeding, supplying food or meals to persons made destitute or otherwise deprived of access because of what's happening, calamities, emergencies, disasters. So our situational analysis, we try to see that people are usually displaced in their homes following disasters. No, people are stressed, anxious, in some cases shocked. Actually, during the first onset, actually sa next slide pala yun. Sige, I'll discuss it later. People are temporarily housed in crowded evacuation shelters. Facilities and spaces are inadequate. Evacuees may have various health problems. May sipon, inuubo, nilalagnat na, or may mga open wounds na nagkokos ng mga dehydrated. May open wounds na nagkokos ng mga infection, and later nagkakaroon ng fever, magkakahawa na, things like that. So our aims in emergency feeding are the following. Of course, first and foremost is we want to preserve life itself. Kasi nga, di ba, human resource is very important. Maintain the morale of the people, not only physiologically, but we have to also talk about mental health. So you have to have a good literature to help our mental health and relieve conditions of casualties. Now we have 3 stages in emergency feeding. We have the early, the immediate, and the extended. Actually, sa totoo lang, no, pag immediate naman, I hope you can imagine the scenario, and we never have, will never experience having yung first-hand experience of yung emergencies and calamities. The early stages describe as food supplies is automatically, immediately cut off, no? So there's no productive work available, and it will last for about a day or 2. Our objective is to provide something to eat, improve the morale, and help counteract shock. Actually, immediately after emergency and disaster, hindi naman food ang priority kaagad ng tao eh. The priority is, you can just imagine, is to see whether your loved ones, your relatives are safe, di ba? Hinahanap mo muna sila, hindi naman, di ba nagkaroon ng disaster, emergency, hindi naman pagkain kaagad ang hahanapin mo. You want to secure your family members, your loved ones, no? And then after that, you want to secure your house, your home, your resources. And then siguro later na yung pagkain. So kasi yun nga yung parang shock eh. Hindi naman immediately nagkaroon ng disaster, ay wala na akong kakainin, hindi. Di ba ang hinahanap natin immediately, our loved ones. We want to secure our loved ones and our resources. And then part na doon yung pagkain. And so during the early part, the calamity, we actually, ang ating priority groups and nutrients are actually carbohydrates, beverages, and soups. For the intermediate stage, this is the situation far from normal but over na sa shock. No? So we give provision of food, relief packages, so provide nutritious foods for temporary maintenance, and it should not exceed for about 2 weeks. So special consideration given to vulnerable group like small children, the elderly, the pregnant, the lactating, and those who have illnesses or diseases. So we provide, aside from carbohydrate, protein sources already. And then for the extended, we provide the complete nutrients, carbohydrates, protein, fats, vitamins, and minerals. So our objective here is to sustain life and maintain the normal health and diet. So it actually exceeds more than 2 weeks. So how are foods given during disasters? So meron mga iba-ibang category. One is dry ration. When family members are evacuated, foods are actually raw. Raw foods are given. Example, mga rice, noodles, no? Yung dry rations usually it is being adopted pag yung mga people do not want to go to the evacuation centers. They do not want to leave their houses kasi nga yung security ng bahay, tsaka ayaw din nila sa evacuation center kasi nga siksika naman, kulang ang CR, so might as well stay doon sa kanilang house, no? So what the community, society, local government is to give dry ration. So ang assumption dyan is since nasa bahay pa sila, meron pa silang capacity to prepare their food. And then yung iba namang nasa evacuation center, we have mass feeding, we provide community kitchen. So may centralized community kitchen for the preparation of the food. And then we have complementary feeding and therapeutic feeding for those na meron talagang need. Small children, infants, therapeutic, may mga special diets na needed for those diet-related diseases like kidney problems, cardiovascular, things like that. Now, the sources of food basically comes from our government, the SWD, local government units, and then there are some donations, no, from different groups, NGOs. Several people are actually donating food. Actually, may apprehension kami dun sa donations din from people kasi we have to ensure food safety. Because sometimes, of course, we know na hindi naman nila intent, no, na mag-deliver na something. Kaya lang, minsan yung traveling time or na-store yung food item, sometimes, tsaka it's cooked in bulk, there is actually high chance na baka magkaroon ng foodborne illness pa dun sa food poisoning. Kasi nga, you are providing large quantity of food items. You do not know the holding time, temperature, abuse of yung food items sometimes happen. Of course, siguro hindi naman yun yung intent nung nag-donate, pero yun nga, sometimes it might lead to that. Kaya very careful ang local government units in terms of, siguro you've heard it in sa mga news minsan, yung parang nire-restrict or you have to ask permission pa sa LGU pag magdo-donate ka ng certain food items kasi siguro ito ang kanilang ano dito, you have to safeguard in terms of food poisoning. Now, our government, the SWD, gives an average of yung one food pack. It's actually good for family of 5 and it can last for about 2 to 3 days. And ito yung content. Siguro you're wondering, no, yun nga, yung rice. Kanina nga tinatanong ako ni Sir Ron, bibigay yan, hindi wala nga lulutuan. No? Yung rice, coffee, instant noodles. No? Kasi ang isang consideration talaga dito, basic, yung shelf life. This type of food items can last long, 3 months, 6 months to 1 year. No? And then, actually, ang cost din, no? The cost of this in 2015, the cost is actually around 300, but because of inflation, siguro ngayon kung i-calculate niya, it's around 500 na siguro, 400 to 500 na yung cost, no? And then this actually provides the basic nutrients like carbohydrates, a little bit of protein, fats to provide energy. Energy and a little bit of vitamins and minerals. Talagang for a few days substance na hindi naman siya for live na, hindi siya for long period of time, no? So yun yung isang essence niya. So characteristics of food during emergency feeding, yun nga, yung one is it should be easy to cook. When we say easy to cook, basically hot water. Minimum ng hot water. Like boiling rice, mga ganun. Can be cooked in bulk or in one container, like yung nga, mga noodle soup, no? So it's appealing to all age group. Pwede siyang pambata, pwede siyang pangmatanda. And it's simple enough and culturally acceptable. Now, in terms of technology, actually marami nang nagawa, no? DOST FNRI, for instance, no, in 2015, they've started launching ready-to-eat food items. Ito na, para ma-answer na nga yung walang cooking preparation, walang cooking area. So, ready-to-eat convenient food items. So, they categorize this different ready-to-eat food items. Category A, ito talaga yung no prep. Yung category B, something that you can nibble on, pero you need drinkables. So like biscuits, cookies, yung maninibble mo na para meron ka kahit pa paanong calories, source of carbohydrates, energy, a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, no? And so on and so forth. So these are examples. So they have yung mga ready-to-eat chicken arroz caldo. They have ready-to-eat corn soup. Ito yung mga brown rice bar, parang chocolate bar siyang ganun. So it contains around 200 to 300 calories. So it's good for it provides 30% of your calorie requirement for the day, enough to give you energy to do your work. Meron ding mga choco bar, vegetable-based choco bar, vegetable-based pulveron, mga micronutrient mix, and mga instant meals. Actually, we conducted also a study. So together with Welbert, Ma'am Yi, Ma'am Mopera, so we developed using sabapil para may fiber, mongo malunggay for vitamins and iron, no? Flour, pulveron bar. So yung na-develop namin actually can last for about 111 days or more or less mga 3 months, no? Shelf stable at 30 degrees Celsius. So 3 months lang yung stability niya. Kasi nga ang factor ngayon talaga sa ready to eat is yung stability. Yung food item can last at room temperature. You do not need to refrigerate it, no? Pwede siyang sa pantry lang, sa table, sa cabinet, and it can last for about 3 to 1 year. So yun yung parang consideration natin for ready to eat food items. Pero ang comment namin dyan, just to share, no, pulburon, hindi ba kailangan ng tubig? Kasi, di ba, parang tawag ito, yun, mabubulunan ka kasi it's something dry, no? So, tama naman, water is needed nga. So, siguro category, category B, something that can be nibbled on, pero you need some drinkables, no? Ang water naman kasi talaga basic, di ba? Kahit nga sabi natin, di ba, kahit walang pagkain, basta may tubig, you can survive for how many days, no? And then these are other, if you're wondering, these are other ready-to-eat food items developed by our government, POST, FNRI. Actually, for emergency, and actually, these are also prepared for military use. Hindi lang for emergency, both din, pero ang isa ding use nitong mga to is for military use pag nasa field sila, nasa combat, nasa mountains or mga areas na talagang very limited din yung food production. So yon, ito yung mga products nila. Now this was launched 2020 and 2021 just recently. Pero last year, I think some of these items were already launched. So inintroduce na, and I think we are developing marketing strategies na kung paano, and yung cost also. Like for example, itong Nutriban, it cost around 180 grams siya eh. It cost around 10 pesos and 15 pesos. So they're still thinking on maybe lowering pa the price to 5 pesos or 10 pesos less, no? And then of course yung shelf life, yung stability. How long can this ban last? Kasi nga emergency and disaster di ba? Baka nga walang cooking, and yun nga sa military use, so nasa liblib na lugar, nasa bundok. So hoping na it will last for about 3 months, 6 months or 1 year. So yun yung mga consideration. And then these are things also unraveled by DOST. You can check out their site. Ito yung sinasabi kong yung mga bar na parang ready to eat. So very convenient. Very small siya pero compact siya in nutrients. So you can place it in your pocket, in your bag. So tapos light lang yung weight niya. Tapos ang shelf life nga niya, it can last for about a year, 6 months to 1 year. So yan. Other products. So there are also studies that evaluated the adequacy of these food aid packs. And in terms of calories, they provide more or less mga 50% to 100% of yung caloric requirement per day given the different age group. So meron namang evaluation na ginawa regarding vitamin A, iron. So it provided more or less 30 to 50% of yung requirement per day. So ang guidelines naman natin in managing community kitchen, no? So you have to consider the site, usually clear and open siya, no? With dapat ang requirement natin may well drain ground floors. May provision ng shade, close to people to be fed, accessible sa mga supply at saka mga routes, and of course merong adequate safe water to use. And then yun nga, yung mga toilet facilities, no, for sanitation purposes. So you have to check the layout. So these are generally our requirements for managing a community kitchen. But of course, in reality, sometimes hindi rin talaga na-follow kasi given nga na ang reality, eto lang ang available na. Usually, ang mga evacuation center natin, di ba, basketball court, ano pa ba, basketball court lang naisip ko, ano pa ba, mga open, mga fields, di ba, yung mga schools, di ba, doon yung mga evacuation center, and talagang hindi siya built for these requirements, but we have to do. So the thing that we really have to take note, very important during communication talaga, is food safety. So the menu for mass feeding are supposed to be dapat simple, easy to cook and serve. Kaya example namin dyan, mga arroz caldo, sopas, yung parang in one cooking, it can, it's jam-packed already with nutrients, vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and it actually is acceptable for kinakain ng sopas, mapamatanda, mapabata, no? It's something na can fill up can warm our stomach. So it's high energy drinks are also good. Kaya lang ang problem sa high energy drink, medyo mahal in terms of cost. Remember, di ba, pag may mga calamities, we also have to consider our limited budget or resources. No? So milk for children is also very important. So I think that's all. So I hope you've learned something from our field, nutrition, in terms of adapting to many climate changes that we encounter, emergency, disaster. So these are the things that we do in our function as nutritionist dietitian in adapting during climate changes. So thank you very much, and back to you, Sir Ron, Ma'am Bailey.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Doc Amy, for that very, very interesting talk and on how concerned ang mga nutritionists natin sa mga na lahat yung mga tao, mga Pilipinong na nakakaranas ng mga emergencies and disasters, that all of you are ensuring that they get their important nutrients even though they are displaced from their normal homes and all that. So it was very interesting po yung mga different researches that you showed from that's coming up from DOST, FNRI. I would really like, that's really something that sana mas mabilis ma-roll.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma-roll down
talaga. Ma-roll out. Actually, marami
Okay.
na sila in the past. Sir Ron, marami na rin sila in the past nung mga late 1980s, 90s. Pero ang talaga problem natin a little bit, if I'm not mistaken, this is my personal view, siguro marketing. Hindi rin siguro ma-market. Di ba meron pa sila dati na parang mga squash noodles, malunggay noodles, pero it's really not that popular in the market, no? Mas popular pa yung mga Korean noodles na hindi naman natin mabasa yung label, pero we're still buying it. Hindi natin alam kung ano yun, di ba? Pero yung mga squash noodles, I think marketing din ang problem natin. So siguro yun din po. Ayan.
So that's a good point po talaga, to make sure yung doon sa research, yung mga future researches nyo with the OST, na importante, malaking words po yung marketing. Okay, thank you so much po for sharing all of that. Yes, and Ma'am Meme has already typed in here in our chat box. If you have any questions po for for Doc Amy, you can start typing it in your questions here, but we'll have an open forum po at the end. So thank you so much, Ma'am Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, let us move on now to, hold on po. Okay, so from nutrition, let's move on naman to, ayaw gumalaw. So let's continue our webinar with the sad reality nga during disaster events. But it's a very, very important issue. Kaya we had to make sure that's included dito sa webinar natin on how to address and lessen the trauma that yung mga disaster victims natin that they have when they lose a loved one during these events. So here with us today is Prof. Maria Melinda Mendoza, who is an associate professor from the Department of Social Development Services in our college. Disaster and dying during death and dying during disasters is one of her major areas of interest, and throughout her more than 3 decades of career as an academic and practitioner, Prof. Mendoza has led national and multi-country research on the impacts of climate change and disasters. So now to talk about how to provide death-related social services across the 4 thematic areas of DRM, I am proud to call on Ma'am Emmy. Please.
Thank you, Ma'am Pat. Oo, talaga may clap talaga si Ma'am Pat. Maraming salamat po. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So for this afternoon's webinar, I have been tasked to talk on death and disasters, providing death-related social services across the 4 themes. No, so I tweaked a little bit the title. Instead of that, I worded it as death-related social services across the DRM spectrum. So let me have a disclaimer at this point, no, that this paper really is more reflexive rather than instructive and procedural, but it's also a call to action. And as Sir Ron had mentioned, no, human ecology as a whole is really a call to action. So even if it's reflexive in nature, no, we will end it with a note for action. Okay, so my presentation will follow this flow. So we'll have a bit of an introduction by reflecting on the definitions, and there are 3 basic concepts that we will try to reflect on and define somehow, given the limited time that we have. So that will include death, disaster, and social services. And then a section on death and disaster, just so we can suit together, no, the relationship between death and disaster. And then we'll talk about the disaster risk management spectrum, so we can continue reflecting on how we can incorporate death and deal with death, no, within the whole spectrum. And then a section, this one starts the call to action, death as a neglected matter when it comes to DRM, and finally some concluding statements. Okay, so let's look into some basic definitions. Now, death has always been the area for the medical sciences, no? And many of the definitions that you will find if you try to look into the definition of death would be coming from the medical sciences, no? So in 1981, I got this definition from Bernard Culver and Gert, no? Death has been being discussed and debated about in so many ways. Paano nga ba malalaman kung patay na? Ano ba talaga ang kamatayan, no? But these authors gave a very concise and something that, medical people, because these are doctors, medical doctors, would agree that death is really the total and irreversible loss of the functioning of the whole brain. Of course, that settled a lot of debates, no, among the medical practitioners, but it also brought a lot of other debates, no, because now they started talking about whole brain death, and how different is that? Is there another type of death aside from whole brain death? No, so Youngner and his colleagues, no, mentioned that they argued that death is inevitable, but its meaning has never been certain because it continues to be a contingent and evolving concept. And it is shaped by the dynamics of medicine, science, society, as well as culture. So much so that even at this time, no, 2021 na nagsimula yung ng discussion about death since time immemorial. Death now is seen as a process involving the cessation of physiological functions, and the determination of death is the final event in the process. So now, instead of a state, some people are saying that it should be looked into as a process. No, a distinction is now being made between death, however, at the cellular and tissue levels, and death of a person. So tuloy-tuloy pa rin, no, ang kanilang discussion at saka debate. Paano ba talaga i-define itong phenomenon, no, this phenomenon called death? But what is being made clear, no, given all the debates and all the discussions, even just for the definition of death, is that death is a medical, it's a social, it's a political, a moral, and even an economic phenomenon. And death is used to define many other phenomena found within human ecosystems. In fact, death statistics are used to forward certain positions, certain advocacies, and certain decisions. Ginagamit pa nga ang death statistics para masabi kung are we going to declare a state of calamity, a state of disaster, no? So in short, in many, many ways, death defines life and our life concerns. Okay, so that's death for you. It does not really give us one definition for death, but just to tell you that it's a debate and it's an ongoing research, no, just to define death. The other concept that we need to define at this time, no, this afternoon, is disaster. Okay, Perry had very social science definition of disaster when she said that disaster is a social scientific concept that refers to a particular class of phenomena whose specification rests, no, in theory-based thinking. So oftentimes disaster is related to hazards and hazard events, no, and as it is experienced by human ecosystems and within the context, no, of human ecosystems. But even government develop mandated definitions of disaster for purposes of determining the boundaries, no, of emergency management, such as, when our governments talk about mitigation, disaster preparedness, response and recovery, which is really the common spectrum, no, and in particularly in connection with the distribution of funds and other resources, no. So disasters, it seems, no, go beyond the occurrence of just natural hazards. No, its definition is not just linked to natural hazards. Indeed, they are linked, but they go beyond that because they are also social, political, and cultural, no, in definition. So here, when related to a disaster is the concept of disaster risk. And usually disaster risk is expressed as the likelihood of the loss of life, injury, or destruction and damage from a disaster in a given period of time. No? And the Handbook of Disaster Research argues that disaster risk is really widely recognized as the consequence of the interaction between, hazards, exposures, sensitivities, capacities, and people's vulnerabilities. Okay, the third is social services, and offhand this refers to government services provided for the benefit of communities, such as, but not limited to, education, medical care, and housing. So usually mga basic needs, no? But they also they include the benefits, no, and facilities, no, such as food subsidies, healthcare, job training, and subsidized housing, adoption, even community management, policy research, and lobbying. So it's a wide range, no, of areas of concern when we talk about social services. Even in 1985, no, the World Summit for 1995 rather, the World Summit for Social Development that was held in Copenhagen, world leaders agreed that international assistance, when we talk about social services, no, international assistance should be targeted towards the basic social services, which include at the time primary health care, basic education, clean water, and proper sanitation. That was 1995, no? But more recent developments in the provision of social services have incorporated more items, no, more areas of concern, especially even in the area of mental health and general well-being. Okay, so ang coverage po ng social services natin, kung gusto natin ng within the context of human ecology, no, is that it should be holistic, and that means it's across the lifespan. So in other words, we think not just of a specific sector, we think of human development across the lifespan. So there are social services that cater more to infants and children, and there are those that cater to the labor force, and there are those that cater to the elderly, no? But as long as people are alive, and we want to preserve that as long as possible, that's the usual trend, no? And so even those who are already in the that space, no, that area of dying, no, they are already transitioning to the next life. As long as they are still part of this life of this world, then they're covered supposedly by our social services. So they're supposed to be inclusive, and so across the social class spectrum, walang sinisino ang social services. Of course, we usually have a bias in favor of those who have nuts, no, yung may mga kakulangan, at saka yung mga na discriminate o yung mga na ma-marginalize, kasi nga baka wala silang capacities, and therefore government should look into their plight, no? And social services should be comprehensive. They should cover basic or general needs, but also they should cover emerging needs and circumstances. They're supposed to be implemented in humane manner, and they're supposed to be at the very basic compliant to human rights, including the right to social justice and the right to human security. And you know, there's a new book just came out in this year, 2021, where the authors were stating, no, they were claiming that, you know, the most basic definition of human security is the absence of fear. And this brings me to, you know, the whole issue and concern about death, because what really started my interest in death was really the question of why is it that some people are not afraid of death on the other hand, we meet a lot of people who do not even want to talk about death. They do not want to have it in a discussion. They don't want to think about it because maybe because they are afraid of death. So this is something that really got my attention, and it went on. No, that attention went on when I came across economically challenged community, no, in Davao de Oro, and where people were actually not afraid, no, of dealing with the phenomenon of death in their daily lives. In fact, ang kwento nila sa akin nga is that every day they think about how they can work together to prepare for death within the community, no, because it's economic challenge, no, to die, no. It's an economic challenge to the family who will be remaining. So they organize themselves in such a way na halimbawa sa anong tawag yan, the wake, no, the yung pag naglalamay, meron na silang kitchen crew. Ayan, para hindi na po problema ang mga namatayan, paano papakainin yung mga dapat pakainin at mga nakikiramay. So may kitchen crew sila. Meron din silang lapida crew, no? Para hindi na problema yung mga families na pati lapida ay hahanapin pa nila o bibilhin pa nila or papagawa pa nila. So doon sa kanilang community, meron na rin gagawa. So meron na silang mga common na kaldero, common na malalaking kawa at malalaking sandok para, everything is covered so that the family where death was experienced or experienced, no, has a lot of really community support. Okay, so hindi lahat, people are not equal when it comes to not wanting, to talk about death, because some are scared, some are afraid, some do not want to think about it, but some do, even in rural, urban communities. Okay, so let me go to death in disaster and death and disaster, just to sew them together. And this is coming from some very basic data from MDAT, no, and just to show rather that death is really incorporated all the time with disasters. If you go to MDAT, no, there's a lot of data about disaster all over the world, and I am actually looking at death and disaster within a 71 year period, from the 1950s to 2021, and I saw that these are the top 5 disasters for the Philippines. Okay, and in terms of many other indicators, but including the indicator of casualties and deaths, no? So nakikita natin, and many of you know that one of the more memorable and tragic disasters that we experienced as a nation was Yolanda, which still has the highest number of deaths, no, since the 1950s, no, one-time disaster. Okay, and following that was an earthquake in 1976. Okay, we're talking about disaster here, not just hydrometeorological events, no, which was really an earthquake, no, that struck the Sulu Tawi-Tawi area, where the reported deaths at that time, no, was up to 6,000, and usually these are even underreported. This kind of statistics are reported because that earthquake came with tsunami, no, in the area. And then the third is a tropical cyclone also, no, Telma. And the 1990 event of Baguio, And the fifth is BOPA, no? PS BOPA, which struck in 2012, no? The Eastern Board, no, of Davao Oriental. Okay. So what I want to show here is that when we're talking about disasters, one of the defining factors, no, of disasters are casualties and deaths, no, and whether we like it or not, they're usually intertwined. It's not very disastrous when you do not have deaths, and so I don't know how we can really talk of a disaster without a casualty. Okay, so the Philippines has always been, we know this very well, the Philippines has always been one of the most vulnerable countries, no? And in 2020, we're still topping together with some other countries, although Indonesia was, you know, the top during that period as a country with the most number of disasters, okay? And this one shows the World Risk Index, and though the Philippines in 2020 ranks 9, I think, no? There was a time that we even was second, no, of the most vulnerable countries as far as hydrometeorological events, no, are concerned. Okay.
Emmy, we
Po.
need to ask you to wrap up na po.
Okay, sige. So this is our DRM spectrum. And we see here that the spectrum really includes preparedness, response, rehab, and mitigation. Okay, and we have some questions here. But let me bring, because I'm being asked to wrap up already. Okay, let me go to death as a neglected matter. Okay, and when we're talking about the spectrum, no, of DRM, when we talk about mitigation, for instance, where are our death-related services? Where are our cemeteries? Are they enough? Where is our crematorium? No, in preparedness, how do we prepare? No, how prepared are we? And are we prepared to respond to extreme events and the likelihood of disasters? What about death management? Are they in our plan? Are they in our scoreboards, no, scorecards rather? We're talking management of death and the missing, but this should include mobility plans as well as mobility routes. No, what about grief and bereavement services? When we're talking about response, again, we're talking about are we giving not just basic food and clothing, but also assistance to the loss of lives? And what about families who are, you know, lost? Wala na ngang makain, but they're also grieving and they're bereaved, no, because of the loss of loved ones. And for recovery and rehabilitation, I guess we should ask ourselves and reflect, what is the coverage of our rehab to build back better, no? How are communities preparing for deaths and disasters, and how prepared are we for the next encounter with mass deaths, no? As well as protracted events where death is imminent, like COVID-19. Okay, so as for conclusion, let me just mention this. How we respond to issues impinging on human ecosystems is largely a function of our definitions and foci. And so we tend to neglect aspects of how we can mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters when we fail to surface them in our collective consciousness. So it is imperative, to my mind, to talk, to discourse, to plan and act on death in the context of disaster risk management. And we have to maximize the utility of a human ecological perspective in culturally appropriate and inclusive DRM. So let's start thinking and talking with the end and in mind. And the next time we reflect on our human ecological framework, on what else can be done given the breadth and depth of DRM, let's not neglect that death is part of life, no? And to mainstream death and dying, no, we need to do a lot of academic work, including conducting research on death and dying issues. I read somewhere that the best way to prepare for death is to live life to the fullest. But let me add to that also that the best way to live life, no, is to prepare for death. With that, thank you.
Thank you very much po, Ma'am Emmy. Sorry we had to cut you for
No
that. But
problem. No
opo,
problem.
but the questions that you actually posed in those last few slides were very interesting and something that is good for the students to make sure that they also have that thing in consideration, if not only while we're in their class, pag nasa profession na nila, when we're discussing CAA and DRR, kailangan rin natin umabot dun sa aspect na yon to make sure that we also consider how we're going to handle and make sure na bibigyan natin ng suporta yung mga tao na nakawalan ng mga mamahal nila sa buhay. Thank you so much. It was very, very interesting po, ma'am. Okay, thank you. As we move on, so yes, a quick clap for Ma'am Emmy. As we move on po, sa next talk natin, we will be given a talk by one of our distinguished alumni from the SERP and from CHE. Sir Ben Aguihon is an urban planner and he's currently working as a city coordinator of UN Habitat Philippines. His planning practice focuses on mainstreaming sustainability to spatial and development planning, increasing community participation in planning processes, and promoting natural and nature-based design solutions in urban infrastructure projects. He is now working on projects that optimize risk assessment methods to inform COVID-19 socio-economic recovery and climate resilience planning, and the localization of city plans and actions to reduce marine litter. So to share the work that he has been doing on building back smarter communities, please welcome ENP Ben Aguihon. Sir Ben?
Thank you, Ma'am Patch. Good afternoon po. Thank you, Sir Jay. Sir Ron, very interesting discussion coming from Doc Amy and Prof. Emmy. Truly, no, na yung extent ng life from feeding to death, very important. And for my input, I will try to contextualize the climate change impacts and planning of consequent disasters, considering din yung current situation natin ngayon with the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Ma'am Emmy, for actually setting the tone of my input for this afternoon. These materials are part of the Building Climate Resiliency through Urban Plans and Designs project implemented by the UN Habitat together with the HSUD and the City of Ormoc. For my presentation, we'll be navigating 5 points: Ormoc City, climate change, pandemic, and development considerations, its dynamics, yung context ng resilient and green recovery. Ito po yung binabanggit natin na building back better. I will try to guide, to navigate yung process namin dito in terms of the project. Some examples of the project outputs in terms of the urban designs and some key takeaways. For our case city, Ormoc is a regional hub in the Eastern Visayas region, and this is an agro-commercial center for renewable and energy capital. Ito yung tina-target nila na vision. And as you know, palagi ito ring nadadaanan ng bagyo as every year, no? As mentioned actually from the presentation of Doc Emmy, Typhoon Yolanda and Typhoon Telma, Uring in 1991, nag-traverse dito sa area ng Ormoc City. This is now 41% urbanized and with a population of around 230,000. In terms of its spatial strategy, multinodal yung mode of development in the city, still anchored dun sa city center nila as the major node of development and taking advantage of the existing facilities and conurbations and urban sprawls para magbuo ng separate urban nodes on those areas. In terms of urban areas, urban land, the built area of the city, from the total 46,000 hectares, around 8.32% lang dyan yung built area, of which may special mention lang ako on urban spaces within 0.24%. So in terms of climate change and pandemic and development consideration, as I've mentioned earlier, sana narinig nyo pa ako, it started raining here in my area. There are 71 villages with flood risk and around 150,000 people yung maapektuhan nito. And an estimate of around 1.3 billion may be lost from extreme events by 2030 if the impact of flooding will not be mitigated. In terms of temperature, in terms of climate change, there will be an expected increase of 8.5 degrees Celsius. There will be expected increase of 2 degrees Celsius under the 8.5 scenario. And this development will provide a hotter temperature in the urban area, especially now na nagsa-start yung increasing urbanization with the investments coming from the housing and the commercial sector. In terms of greenhouse gas emission, they have 151,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent as of 2017 inventory. And these come from 64% coming from the agriculture, waste, and industry sectors, while 36% comes from the electricity use. So definitely this is highly contributed by the urban actions that we deliver in our homes and our offices with the use of that requires the use of electricity. This is the citywide risk assessment. As you can see across Ormoc, they have specific hazard and eventually specific disaster that is about to happen. In the west area, which their agriculture area is, it is at risk to flooding, while their urban center and coastal areas where there are a lot of human settlements, it is at risk to urban heat and flooding, while the upland and the forest area are also at risk to landslide. And this also, Ormoc City is situated in an active area of volcanology. They experience a great impact of earthquake last 2017 that affected upland settlements. In terms of the current pandemic, we can see that 63% of the cases are still within the urban area, which displays around 15,000 and a half workers and about 438 businesses decided to close. On the other end of this, 25% of the households still not have the direct access to water at home when we need water for our sanitation. And informal settlers are still living on their destitute houses, and there are about 3,147 families na walang adequate housing for their isolation and quarantines. And these are on top of the climate hazards that is affecting the city, including flooding and urban heat. These are just some key issues, top-line results of an impact study developed with DAMPE to assess the impact of COVID-19 to the urban poor and to link it with the action requirements in designing the city. Number one, we can see that there is inaccessibility of health services aside from the low health-seeking behavior now. Not only discussing displacement, but also rising household debts. The shift on mode of delivery, not only in education, but also on other social services, and the inaccessibility to food and formation of unhealthy responses, as we can see from Doc Barion's presentation, and some limitations on mobility, not only on health concern, but also on the cost required. No, tumaas din yung fare, tumaas din yung bayad natin when we want to travel. But what is also good here, what is noticeable also here is there is a high level of knowledge and under awareness, basically, on how we can prevent the spread of COVID-19. That's hand washing practice, the access to clean water, and the providing spaces for our physical distancing. In two major issues, we look on housing conditions at risk and on public and open spaces. We can see that 25% of those people residing in Ormoc have threats in eviction. And there's a growing number of informal settlers, especially after Yolanda happened, and they are now living along river banks. And in terms of open spaces, public and open spaces, these are your roads, your parks, your markets. 85% of the surveyed urban poor mentioned that there is a need for open spaces for them to for travel and to access their basic necessities. But of course, there is the constant consideration of climate hazards and its eventual disasters like flood and storm surges. Looking on the interface of climate change impacts and the COVID-19 pandemic, we can look on three entry points in doing our recovery work and our development planning work. Number one is the improvement of basic services. We can look on sustainable water management. We can look on affordable housing and improving internet connectivity. In terms of public spaces optimization, there is a need to establish resilient and sustainable street networks and to utilize the network of open spaces for our COVID-19 responses and recovery. And of course, in any disaster, there's always impact on the economic. So there also the rise of sustainable business models that we can see with our current situation does require us to improve the virtual spaces for our businesses, providing incentives for our businesses with green approaches, and to design smart and resilient approaches, particularly with the private sector. I think everyone is familiar with this caricature or this editorial cartoon, and there's story about it. There is a progression of how people view the COVID-19 and how it happened to be connected to climate change later on in a continuum of problems that we are facing now. So COVID-19 pandemic exacerbates the long-term concerns of economic stability and climate change. However, in the country, we are always aware that COVID-19 is not only the problem. There's always disaster, there's always typhoon, there will be fires, there will be earthquakes that can happen anytime. Thus, there is always a framework of addressing problems in totality, no, considering all those hazards available to us or happening to us. So how are we doing the response on this or planning on this? We have what we call a response recovery sustainable development continuum, which in a crisis in general we define it as an act or a process of returning to normal state. It involves a wide range of multidimensional planning. I think this is what has been emphasized by Ron a while ago on transdisciplinary approaches. It is phased, so there is immediate, short-term, medium, long-term initiatives and goals. And it is more than returning to your pre-disaster context. It's even going beyond, if possible, on your sustainable development goals. And this requires major decisions and to be made under good governance. So situating it in a continuum, we can position the recovery work, let's say in our current situation now, from the start of 2020 up to the current, where new realities, pandemic restrictions, new methods, slowing down, added to the existing hazards of climate change and COVID-19. And when we say planning continuum in terms of recovery, it is about to set the tone on your return or your return to the sustainable development goals of the city. Overall, there are 6 rehabilitation guiding principles that we are providing in all recovery work. Number 1 is it building back better and safer. It looks on exposure to risk would be to a level that is less than before. Action that shall address the vulnerabilities and risks, promoting DRM and resilience building. There's a mention of disaster risk assessment a while ago, and that is the tool that we can use in addressing our specific vulnerabilities and risks. It should be inclusive and holistic. There will be no person and no place behind. Multiple resource generation and financial resources should be achieved in making a broad base of impacts and stakeholders. It should be needs-based and results-oriented. The use of emergency responses as building blocks. So when you when you do your response and recovery work, it should be building block to your development goals in the city. And it should be collaborative, multi-sector, and participatory. I'm also floating the concern of systems model as also coming from our framework. There are 5 thematic areas in system models. We can look on organization from individual to national or to the state. We have the spatial elements from your plot to blocks to your to the country. And there is functional elements when we look on planning, public works, revenue systems, and management. And we also look on the physical elements, looking on your public facilities up to your services and your housing. And of course, the element of time that should always be considered when you do your recovery planning. So these are some entry points in mainstreaming your post-crisis strategies and actions within the current planning system in the country. Your typical planning base is your ecological profile and sectoral studies. At minsan tawag natin dito situational analysis. And when you do your visioning, that's also an opportunity for us to mainstream crisis or post-disaster development goals. When you do your goals and objectives, strategic pathways, and your, of course, implementation in developing your programs, project, and activities. I'm just floating this particular reference. Last year, we released a guide on integrating health to spatial planning that looks on 5 concerns. That's compact places, that's socially inclusive places, better connected places, resilient and climate change and natural hazards, and institutionally integrated management. These are also some learning resources from UN Habitat. You can look on this in our website. When we talk of disaster, when we talk of recovery, at the end of the day, what we are looking for is resilience, which is the ability of a system or a community or a society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, and adapt to, transform, and recover from the effects of this hazard in a timely and efficient manner including the preservation and restoration of essential basic structures and function through risk management. That's why risk assessment is very important, because that's the basis of your decisions on how are you going to return or restore your basic services and structures. When we say resist, it is the ability for us to withstand the negative impacts of the hazards. Hindi niya to tinatanggap, ibinabalik niya lang ito, let's say flood, your flood resistant engineering, binabalik nila yung water. You can also absorb it. You can take, let's say, the water to be absorbed by your pipes or by your underground aquifers or your storage. It can also be accommodated if you can assess how much yung volume ng flood na papasok. Pwede mong i-design yung parks or yung bahay mo na pwede siyang mag-steady doon for a while, then tsaka siya babalik sa natural streams. And of course, yung recovery, hindi pag nasira, kailangan ibalik dun sa dati niyang status or mas higit pa dun sa pangangailangan, sa new na mga pangangailangan na inilalabas noong hazard. And adapt to, you can design your buildings or your roads that the flood can just pass through in a matter of, let's say, an hour or 30 minutes. It depends on your goal of how and when you want to resume normalcy after a disaster, after a typhoon. And transform. I think this is the main challenge for every city and every communities in the country, because this requires a large amount of investment in putting in new technology and redesigning everything in our cities. In our project, we are sponsoring the idea of green recovery.
Ben, excuse me, can you summarize na po ng konti?
Yes, I'll try. Yes, ma'am, I'll try. Give me 3 minutes. Sorry. This green recovery, which is aligning back to your long-term climate change and sustainability goals. So I'm just flashing some photos from Ormoc City. This is how we do the process. We underwent resilient and green recovery planning, and these are some projects that we have on different sectors. And another session on mentoring in specific urban planning and design. So I'm just flashing some outputs from these workshops. This is how you can redesign your built environment that addresses adaptation and mitigation of climate change. There's building design with arcades, trees and benches, water collection, discharge and collection, deployment of market on wheels, bike lanes, and cooling and better ventilation for your buildings. In terms of your roads, you can put in, again, trees and open air services. Ilapit natin yung tindahan, yung kainan sa mga kalsada, and of course, support a safe public mobility. In terms of waterfronts, no, madaming cities sa atin sa bansa sa Pilipinas is facing the coast. So we can introduce mangrove rehabilitation and providing that linear space, linear park, that buffer zone from the coast. So para that particular distance na binibigay agad natin from the coast to the settlements or any infrastructure, it's a built environment mo, that's already a part of your adaptation measures. And these are just some examples on how you can there's how you can make your built area pandemic responsive. Again, and this is, I think this is the mention on how we're going to include the community, the people in our work. No, so these are just examples from the community workshop on urban design at Barangay Canadyeng. This is one of our workshops. This is the situation on the ground. This area is particularly at risk to storm surge and flooding. And there's a group of informal settlers here. And this is the situation in the city on the ground. And this is our design. No? There is the social housing component. There is a waterfront component, and a lot of trees and a lot of water pathways in the built environment mismo. Hindi lang doon sa river, hindi lang doon sa sea, but also within the built environment, meaning your roads, your canals, and even within the housing units. And these add on to their climate and development objectives. As we have mentioned, this can be mainstreamed not only on the project development, but more on the project conceptualization on the objective setting. And these are some resilience, economic, and development benefits. So there you can save people from flooding. You can have annual savings for the city. You can use water that you can collect as another resource, and that can decrease temperature within your community. It also helps in decreasing CO2 emissions, additional vegetation area in the city, and rationalization of your walkability in the city. And of course, in any project that we do, as much as possible, there should be a housing component on it that is part of our mission as an organization. Hopefully, I got some messages across, but just to emphasize 5 points, we have to situate recovery planning in a planning continuum, and once we do, or once we put it on that continuum, we should put also the climate and health as an input, meaning a consideration and an outcome of planning. And there should be an integration of issues and solution as a process that can help us also mainstream investments on those projects. If that project can solve multiple problems and issues in an area, that is a very good project. And there must be emphasis on the vulnerable poor. I have mentioned of informal settler families and even your daily workers that has been affected by the problem. Kailangan magkaroon tayo ng tailor-fit program to them, and we can experiment in maximizing your open spaces, because that's an attempt to equalize the uneven and differentiated impacts of flood, of storm surge, and now COVID-19. And if you want to develop project, it should be on a neighborhood scale. Sa atin, every now and then, lagi tayong bumababa sa barangay. We are aware that an impact can be generated in a neighborhood scale. And hopefully you got the process of resilient and green recovery. This can be tested not only in Ormoc, but across different cities and settings in the community, in the country. The learnings from this project will be developed together with the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Design and Urban Development, which we will be releasing maybe early next year as a guide to all local government units and planning practitioners in how are we going to mainstream resilient and green recovery in our planning work. That's from my end. Over to you, Ma'am Patch. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Ben, for that comprehensive lecture on how we can actually mainstream mga crisis strategies. Exactly saan tayo pwede tumulong sa mga LGU on how to not just go back to after any disaster or even COVID. Sana hindi nga tayo babalik lang dun sa normal, mag-transform tayo and make sure that we're more prepared and we're be more conscious of that we are well adapted to whatever disaster may come our way. Okay. Yes. And for our, hold on, let me check on my. Last but not the least, our reactor for today is one of our collaborators from the Eastern Samar State University. Dr. Bless Badok is a disaster risk management scholar who recently obtained her PhD in commerce from the University of Santo Tomas. And Dr. Bless is also a survivor of the Typhoon Haiyan, which she will highlight in her reaction to the four talks given previously. Please welcome Dr. Bless Badok.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope I am clear.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Sorry. Okay, so I will just share my screen. Is it visible already? Oh.
We're still waiting for it to show. Antay lang. Oh no.
Yeah, my internet is quite
Opo,
problem
alam
here.
ko po, nakapunta na po ako sa Giwan, so familiar po. But ang ganda-ganda po dyan. So, inggit po ako actually right now.
I hope my PowerPoint is already showing. Is it?
Yes po, it's showing na, Ma'am Doc Bless.
Okay, so as a reaction to the topic of Sir Ron, it was like a walkthrough the role of human ecology and transdisciplinary approaches and system approaches towards providing solution to climate change, adaptation, and DRM. Being one of the survivors of Typhoon Yolanda, the presentation was indeed an eye-opener for me. And it shows that a multidisciplinary approach to wicked problems born out of the VUCA era or the vulnerable, uncertain, complex era is not enough. In fact, it's just quite scratching the surface of the problem. And we need an advanced approach, and it's the transdisciplinary approach, supplemented, of course, with the systems approaches. And it is a necessity so that we can get through the core of the problem being solved. And also, the mode of survival should emanate from the various spheres of disciplinary, various discipline with the strong involvement of stakeholders and the survivors themselves as owners of the experience and who are more likely to be propelled to move forward with better strategies and more sustainable actions. So that was quite here with the nutrition in terms of in emergencies by Dr. Amy Sherry. This biscuit reminded me during the Yolanda days. It during the first few weeks, it made us survive. And then also it was important for us to have accessibility to water without being dependent to electricity. So the jetmatic pumps and open wells were very much important during that time. I hope so that with the green recovery, green resilient of urban communities, where smarter communities will be able to highlight this as well. Also, with the presentation, it showed it somehow allowed me to see rural areas rich in sources of raw materials. We have the swamp taro, the crops, and everything, and this can be used for processing so that it can become raw materials for ready-to-eat food products, like the one shown in the presentation, funded by the UST, with candy bars, with malunggay mix and others, so that it can be produced as substitute to the USAID energy biscuits that the United States provided us during Yolanda. These locally made ready-to-eat food products will not only maximize the potentials of Philippine agricultural produce, but this can also give birth to social enterprises from the communities as food processors. Of course, with the supervision of our nutrition scientists, so that product quality and nutrition and food security issues will be properly addressed. Also, with the death clusters in Melinda, Mendoza, it has shown the importance of comprehensive and all-inclusive social services with the presence ideally felt, starting from prevention of disaster to disaster preparedness, the proper response, and rehabilitation and recovery. Also, there should be an adequate preparation that somewhat, because adequate preparation rather, somewhat provides a cushion to the shocks of disaster survivors. If death is inevitable, like I mean, after Yolanda, I always thought that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But then again, with ample preparation, it is still important that this preparation should be done before, during, and after disasters, so that it can ease towards moving forward through death-related social services. In fact, during my dissertation, in an interview with our DRM officers, death management is already included in the scope of DRM in Tacloban City. Before, they were just response in their management of disaster. And lastly, with Mr. Ben, community resilience strengthened by building back smarter communities. Because smarter communities somehow decreases the vulnerability of vulnerable populations. Also, transdisciplinary approach is very much relevant in building smarter communities, ideally encompassing areas on policy and governance, economic performance, investment, employment, and human capital, social inclusion, poverty reduction, and the sustainability of cultural and natural environment. So I borrowed this from the UNWTO. Also, resilient green recovery approach considers all this, should be inclusive and holistic, and ideally will benefit post-disaster communities by strengthening their resilience. And eventually, all of this should pave the way for sustainability and future survival. I love the combination of the topics in this webinar. It's like a puzzle falling into place, and we ended up with sustainability. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much for that, Doc Bless. And it's nice to see that we were actually able to touch things that you actually experienced during a very difficult time, I'm sure, when Yolanda passed by. And thank you so much for your time. And as we continue now, we'll have a 10-minute Q&A. Hold on. Which I will now turn over the webinar to Professor Chris Malenab to facilitate the open forum. Ma'am Chris?
Thank you very much, Ma'am Patch. Really, it is enriching as well as heartwarming webinar for each one of us. I believe that we were able to reflect, and also we were able to think and sit back and just look at how the different sectors are working together and hopefully in harmonious, and that we have seen the presenters give interesting as well as comprehensive presentations on the contemporary concerns and issues in a holistic manner. And I would also want to commend Dr. Bless Gonzalez for such a beautiful way of reaction to the presentation. Thank you very much, Mom. Your insights are really top-notch and very useful for each one of us. So right now, we want to hear from you, our dear students, from your learnings, from your questions, from your clarifications, and even your reactions. So the chat box is just here. You can type in your questions. Let us know, and let us utilize the time, because this is our chance to ask and learn more from the experts in these various fields. So earlier, there were questions already pitched into us, and simulan ko na po para mas ma-maximize natin ang ating open forum. So the first question came from one of our professors, Dr. Jennifer Marie Amparo, and this is addressed to all of the speakers. The question is, how do you envision a world post-COVID in your field of expertise as we continue to address climate change and disaster risk? So again po, how do you envision a world post-COVID in your field of expertise as we address climate change and disaster risk?
Start na siguro ako.
Sige, ma'am. Thank you, Doc Amy.
Siguro ma'am, that's a very, very, as much as it's very interesting, parang pang Miss Universe yung tanong. Kaya ako na siguro Sir Ron at saka Sir Ben, parang pang beauty contest yung tanong eh. Anyway, actually after the COVID nga, I think in terms of our field in nutrition, many people nowadays are very health conscious, no? Medyo talagang nag-perk up yung interest in terms of nutrition, good health, kasi nga you have to build your your immunity. Walang gamot sa COVID eh. So laging ang bukang bibig ng mga tao is more on building your immunity. So really much interest talaga yung nag-surge in terms of good health, better eating habits. So I expect in the coming years yung the aftermath of pandemic, many people will really be health conscious, and in terms of a diet, they will be more on the plant-based diet, at saka maybe also favoring the local ones, the ones which are actually more accessible, what is locally available, more indigenous, kasi nagkaroon din tayo ng problem during lockdowns eh. Talagang yung access nagkaroon ng problem, and nowadays we see na we have so many resources pa pala to tap in our own places, in our own community. So maybe those two, ma'am. Much interest more on health and nutrition, good eating habits, and then favoring what is locally available, more on the plant-based diet. Looking also, many people also became conscious of yung mga being resilient, yung mga concept of sustainability, things like that, because during pandemic, ang daming mga webinars on this eh. So I think, especially among the young people, so siguro medyo na slowly but surely na-inculcate yung essence or concepts of resilience and sustainability, and part of that is yung sa diet, yung intake. And nowadays we promote yung mga plant-based diet. And yun, in the future, I think medyo magiging popular yon, and many people will really take care of their health and be conscious in terms of their food intake. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much po for the comprehensive answer, Doc Amy. Na-touch mo nga, ma'am, no? Yung mga relationships after na magkaroon ng change in the lifestyle, ay magkakaroon din po ng opportunities for communities to change also in terms of the services that they can offer, and at the same time for the industries within these communities to thrive and prosper because of the demand and also because of the change in the paradigm. So we want to learn and hear more also. Salamat po, Doc Amy, from our speakers, Prof. Emmy, Sir Ben, Sir Ron.
Ma'am, can I go next?
Sure po. Thank you very much.
So ako naman, ma'am, post-COVID, what I envision is that there would be sustained, no, and more critical engagements and looking into our definitions of disaster. Kasi right now, when we talk about disaster risk management, oftentimes we just relate them or equate them with all the things that are happening within the climate change arena, no? So but climate change is also so big and super wicked, no, that nakapakita nga ni Sir Ben kanina na eventually, you know, even our concerns about biodiversity and about this COVID thing, these are just parang introduction to many other big super wicked issues, no, and concerns that we're going to face in the near future. But I guess what COVID-19 and the lockdown and the so-called pandemic has taught us, no, is that we have to be very critical about a lot of things, including information, that how to weigh information, and also to see, critically see that there are a lot of information that are usually discriminated against. They are kumbaga, they are marginalized, no? So how do we put them out so that they cease to be marginalized, no, and they become arenas, no, of very fruitful and productive discussion, so that we can talk about a lot of things, no, and come up with a lot of solutions for this week problem. So ang tingin ko dito, ma'am, after COVID, there will be still a lot of debates, and hopefully these are sustained and productive debates. And then also we will be rethinking, as far as I'm my concern is concerned, no, death and dying. We will be rethinking about a lot of things in terms of providing services and how to really respond, no, to a lot of things when it comes to disaster. Kasi ma'am, ang dami talagang kulang ngayon, lumalabas ang daming kulang na mga services at saka mga interventions. Many of these interventions we have not thought about, kaya meron tayong oo nga, no, may mga ganun tayo. And unless we talk about these things, unless we talk about death and dying, for instance, no, we will not be able to mainstream this, no, in DRM and even in climate change adaptation. So yun po, yun ang nakikita ko, magkakaroon ng maraming discussion at saka mga sustained discussion, so that we can co-create, we can collaborate, we can be constant in our discourses towards a collective consciousness of how to deal with the things that are still going to happen.
Thank you very much for the comprehensive answer, ma'am. We cannot put it in any way as perfectly as you did. So we will continue now with the open forum by hearing it out from Sir Ben. Thank you po.
Thank you, ma'am. I agree with Prof. Emmy. Yung pandemic ngayon, pinakita niya yung symptoms ng, let's say on our field, of bad planning, of bad human settlements planning. Let's say, we applaud, of course, those community pantries, but that's actually a criticism of how food is not available in every communities. And that's a discourse now of, let's say, sa atin sa human nutrition, of how we're going to, how community nutrition or yung urban gardening na may for food security is now being practiced, no. So yung ganitong, these are guidance na binigay sa atin way before, but it's not practiced and it's not implemented, no. Kaya nakikita natin ngayon, na-validate ngayon on these times yung paano tayo dapat nagpaplano ng komunidad, ng kahit ng sidewalk o kahit ng parks o kahit ng bahay, na meron sana kahit maliit na area for urban gardening. That's because that will ensure at least that you have a food to eat in any cases na hindi ka makabili o wala kang pambili nga sa panahon natin ngayon. At sa panahon din ng disaster, ganun din siya, no? Sa panahon ng natural disasters, ganun din siya. As compared ngayon na ang nagkaroon sa pandemya na ngayon, hindi ka makalabas, hindi ka makabili, wala kang trabaho. So yung ganitong kawalan ng ganitong provision, ng kawalan ng ganitong program sa communities is because hindi ito na-implement. So I think tama, I agree, magkakaroon ng discussions, and I think with our project we're trying to start it, no, especially with the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development. Hopefully when the material on resilient human settlements framework and the COVID-19 agenda will be released soon, will be released by next year. Sana na-capture niya lahat noong kailangan ng LGUs and communities. At hopefully po ma-engage din namin yung College of Human Ecology in commenting on it. Salamat po.
Thank you very much po for your answers, Sir Ben, and at the same time for providing examples also at para mas mapakita kung paano ang connections among various sectors when it comes to dealing with climate change, hazards, and disaster risk. And at the same time po, salamat din sa pagtatahi ng mga kasagutan mula sa nutrition, sa social services and social technology, and papunta po sa planning. As you mentioned, planning as a continuum in order to promote resilient communities. So meron po kami, dahil sa ending niyo sir, meron po kaming katanungan. What are the points of convergence or points of collaboration po between your organization as well as the academe, both CHE and at the same time the academe wherein Ma'am Blessy is currently representing. Sir Ben, baka po pwede ninyong ma-expound. Thank you po.
Yes po. For now po, as I've mentioned, we are working on the Climate Resilience Human Settlements Framework with the Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development. We are starting to draft it. We have started drafting it. Siguro po ito pwede namin itong i-share sa College of Human Ecology for your comments, especially from your particular expertise, and to ensure yung sinasabi nga kanina ni Ron na transdisciplinary co-production of knowledge, no? That's siguro yun din yung maganda natin sigurong ma-practice, no? Yung salimbayan or yung exchanges of the academe and the practitioners or the NGOs or any organization working outside the academe. Kasi yun yung magtatahi talaga of the co-production, no, ng knowledge. Hindi siya magbabias on the academic presentation, and it's not only biased on the practical sense, no, ng practitioners. So yun po yung isang bagay na pwede natin pagsimulan, yung pong pagbuo natin ng Climate Resilient Human Settlements Framework po ng Pilipinas, no po.
Okay, thank you very much for that, sir. And I'm sure CHE as well as the Eastern Samar State University are excited with this kind of collaboration. Doc Bless, vinolunteer na po namin ang Eastern Samar. Pero we really hope po that through this webinar, we are also able to forge partnership, not just within the academe, but with the development sector. So as much as we would want to continue, we will have our final question na po. And this is for all our speakers. This is from Professor Dangkalan. Given all the presentations, he wants to ask if there are concrete examples wherein the CHE framework was used in CCA-DRR initiative or any program in your field of expertise. So, volunteer na lang po kung sino pong gustong maunang sumagot. Thank you very much po.
Ako na rin ulit, ma'am, kasi medyo unstable yata yung internet ko, baka mawala. So,
thank you so much po.
Yes, ma'am. Opo, always naman we in the IHNF as part of the College of Human Ecology, we are very conscious in following the college research and extension plans, and also the university, mission, vision, and also the Ngayon nga agora na, no? So we have this agora. So we always it's good that actually sa ano naman talaga, as explained by Sir Ron kanina talaga, no, very important yung health, nutrition, and actually may human ecological concept talaga ang field namin sa nutrition. Very much talaga kami human ecologists kung tutuusin talaga, no? So our researches plans nowadays really is more on the health, public health. And looking also at the sustainable development goals, we are still on the researches and extension activities on promoting food and nutrition security and zero hunger, so as much as possible, no? So we look at our environment, not only the social but also the physical environment, in making sure that food and nutrition security will be achieved or attained. Yung parang ganun po, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much po, Doc Amy. Very exciting times for CHE when it comes to the trajectory po, especially in the field of nutrition and human nutrition and human nutrition. Thank you very much po, Ma'am Emmy. Sir Ben?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I think very, very relevant and very, practiced yung transdisciplinary approach in planning. No? Well, it always started naman on all planning group that it is multi-expert, but at the end of the day, you should have a common analysis. No? It should speak and not in siloed analysis, and that I think yun yung pinapakita ng funnel kanina na presentation ni Ron. And that's how we deal with developing plans and even doing designs. We try to put in an architect or a landscape designer in face of the community and talk about it, to have the technical insights and the community needs directly pinagbabangga natin, no? Pinagpoproseso natin sila sa kanila, no? Hindi tayo nagmi-middleman doon, but we allow them to speak. So I think that's in terms of field practice, that's how we do it, and that gives us high uptake of the community that we are working with, and also on the end of the technical expert, another considerations when you again do the same project on different community. So nag-expand din yung manner of practice niya. Hindi lang siya nakatapos o nakabuo. Kasi as practitioner, we also adjust, we also develop, we also take considerations of our experiences on our next projects. So I think that's how I see it with how we did the projects in urban design in Ormo.
Thank you very much po for expounding more on the practices and the way of designing na ginagawa po ninyo, Sir Ben, and at the same time also for advocating and including the essence of participatory planning. Emmy, let's hear it from you po.
Yes, ma'am. Let me be very straight and strong about this, no? That the future really of human ecology is in the transdisciplinary approach and perspective. This is not to undermine the utility, no, and the contribution of disciplines, no, and unidisciplinary approaches. But we do not have the answers to everything, and you will be surprised, we will be surprised that many of our questions are actually already being lived, no, in the everyday lives of people in our community. There's just so much to learn from our communities and from those whose voices we usually do not hear. And so we really need transdisciplinary perspective so that we can genuinely co-create with them, no, the answers to that we are all commonly facing. Co-create, collaborate, and discuss with them. It is imperative that we do that, no, because unless we do that, we will just be in our silos. We will just be in our big boastful bubbles, no. Transdisciplinary approach is exciting, but it also requires certain attitudes, no, and principles. For one, ang maganda sa kanya, it is built, no, on the principle of humility. No? So isa 'yun sa pinakamagandang and then you listen to people around you. And this is what we need really if we can move forward in a world that is, unpredictable. And sabi nga, it's a VUCA world out there and we need to, hold hands together. Okay, and that's what we do in human ecology, and that's what is exciting about this college. Yun lang po.
Well said from all of our speakers. We've really learned a lot, and we've also they've also asked us to look inside us para mas makapag-reflect pa in terms of the direction of transdisciplinary approach when it comes to managing disaster risk as well as climate change adaptation and promoting climate change adaptation. And also in terms of preparing, not just in terms of living healthily, preparing the communities and our urban spaces for a better and at the same time our conducive and safe environment, and also in terms of designing responsive social services. So with that, amidst the vulnerable and complex world that we are in now. So with that, we end this open forum. Let me turn it over to Ma'am Patch. Thank you very much po.
Oh, that was like really great answers from all of our speakers, and thank you so much. There was a lot that was said. It's really hard actually to come up with like one final sentence here. But before we move on, we will let me just share my screen again. We would like to give our sincerest thanks to our speakers today. We would like to present this certificate of appreciation to each of the speakers. This one is for Prof. Ron J. Dangkalan for serving as a resource speaker on the webinar Unpacking the Value of Transdisciplinary Approach in CCA-DRR, organized as part of the HUME 123 Climate Change Adaptation and Disaster Risk Reduction in Human Ecosystems course of the College of Human Ecology, held this 27th of November 2021 via Zoom and signed by our one and only Dean Ricardo S.M. Sandalo. And so the following slides would show the same for Doc Amy and K Prof. Emmy and K Sir Ben, and obviously K last but not the least to Doc Blessy Badok for her insights. Oops, I think I did not share the sound na naman dito. Wait, I have to stop this because hindi nakashare ang sound. So our closing actually is by Prof. Me de Mesa, and she who is one of the FICs, I think in 2 sections dito for HUME 123. She prepared a video.
We came here today with a recognition and a common understanding
Oops, sorry.
of climate change and
Sorry.
disaster risk as a wicked problem experienced in our human ecosystems, a reality that we are facing nowadays. As a wicked problem, climate and disaster risks demand multi-sectoral involvement and transdisciplinary collaborations across scale and beyond borders, a seemingly daunting task, but we believe is doable. The webinar presented different facets of the transdisciplinary approaches of human ecology in tackling CCA and DRR, as expressed in the topics of nutrition in times of emergencies, delivery of death and disaster-related social services, and urban design for resilient cities. From these topics, we challenge our students to observe the points of convergence in actions, critique the disjoint and inconsistence, or just have something to take away on how human ecology as a transdisciplinary field can be applied to CCA and DRR. At this point, let me thank our invited resource speakers who provided their expertise, experiences, and knowledge to us this afternoon. Ma'am Amy Barion, Kuya Ben Aguijon, and our reactor, Dr. Blessy Badok Gonzalez. To the participants, and of course to our HUME 123 students who actively joined us in this 2-hour webinar. And to our HUME 123 faculty in charge, Sir Ron, Ma'am Emmy, Ma'am Grace, and Ma'am Patch, for organizing such timely and relevant webinar. Let me leave our students with a quote from the great Albert Einstein for them to ponder on. The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Good day to everyone.
And with that, before we end, can we request that the students and all of our other participants who are joining us today to turn on their cameras for a quick photo opportunity. I will stop this sharing so that we can open all our cams and prepare our smiles. We actually have 4 pages. Sir Ron, can you help me also take backup?
Sure, I'll take the picture, Ma'am Patch. No? So for in my case, it's just 2.
Madami ba?
Yeah.
Ano,
Ako na mag-take a picture, Ma'am Patch. Can we all open our camera, please? And then I'll take a picture to see all the beautiful and handsome faces that you all have. Okay.
Smile, everybody.
Sige po. Thank you. 1, 2, 3. Isa pa. Now for the second slide, can I go in? 1, 2, 3. Ayan, thank you po for everyone who came. No, meron pa tayo from Palawan, from Samar, I think from Mindanao. We also have someone here. Thank you. Bicol also. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you po.
And yes, last but very, very, very not the least, Sir Ron has already included in our chat box. Please evaluate our webinar at the link that is flashed here. It's also in the chat box. Thank you to everyone who took their time this Saturday afternoon to learn how important it is to integrate our different domains with the final goal of enhancing how all Filipinos can respond to the hazards and to minimize the impacts of climate change in our country. Thank you so much to everyone who was able to join us. And any last words, mga FICs, for our students?
And the sem na. Joke lang. We all enjoy and we hope
Kami na yung nagkakano.
Ma'am Bailey, Merry Christmas.
Merry
Merry
Christmas to
Christmas. Happy
all.
holidays.
Ami, Ben, Patch, Ma'am
Sir
Bless,
Ben, thank
Amy,
Thank you so much, mga
Yes.
kasagwan. Maraming salamat.
Daisy.
And for the co-laborship. Ma'am Patch, thank you so much for really an excellent hosting. And Ma'am Amy, maraming salamat. And Sir Ben and Ma'am Blessy.
Happy anniversary to Che.
Happy anniversary, Che.
47.
Happy 47th year.
Opo, nandun sila sa ibang Zoom room.
So many webinars today.
We are all everywhere.
We're all everywhere. So many webinars today. Thank you for all. Ano po,
Thank
for
you
all.
po, Ma'am Bailey. Salamat.
Everyone.
Ma'am
Bye-bye
Malena,
po.
thank you.
Thank you all students for coming.
Thank you.